In this video, we're going to talk all about Skaven in Age of Sigmar.
Okay.
Welcome Wargamers, my name is Doug with 2Plus Stuff, and in this video, like I said, we're going to do a big compilation, kind of like I did with Free Peoples, of all the various lore segments that we have about Skaven, in Age of Sigmar, and kind of figure out what the faction is like now. This video was requested by a ton of people. This is a faction that people are super interested in. We're going to dive into why, where they are, and where I hope they go. Real quick before diving into that, give this channel a subscription if you are interested in Age of Sigmar content, and if you want even more AOS stuff, I actually started an Instagram feed, which you can find or also in the description down below for a direct link, and over there I have pictures of stuff that I'm working on as I kind of go through how I design my color palette and things like that. A lot more fan interactivity over there. It's much easier to talk to you guys through a different channel than YouTube because of the way comments work in YouTube. Conversations that I start with people simply get lost. So if you want to have a video that you know is getting asked and I'm seeing the question, head over to Instagram, follow me there. Now, I never assume in my videos that people are Warhammer Fantasy Battle veterans moved over to AOS. We have a ton of new people, which has been the best thing about AOS. So to kind of recap what Skaven are, or at least what they were, I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. Skaven are these kind of half-man, half-rat things. They're really wild and fun. They're a great element of the old Warhammer Fantasy Battle universe. They're the kind of thing that if they were to all get on the same page and work together, they could easily destroy any opponent, but they're so conniving and backstabbing, and they have personal ambitions that they just crush each other. Every time they start to win, they fall apart. Because every Skaven has this built-in need for superiority and power, and it makes them very fun characters. Big egos,
teeny little bodies.
Now, as a race, they divide themselves into various clans. Really what the clans are is different means of which achieving the goal of conquering the world. So for example, Clan Skryre uses technology, Clan Mulder uses manipulation of living things, kind of like Frankenstein-y. Pestilence uses biological warfare, so diseases and things like that. And Eshin uses stealth. This is the destabilization of governments by killing their leaders or other important people. Now, of course, you can have a Skaven who kind of dabbles in all of those things, but really what the clans are is taking that specific mode of warfare and conquering to the extreme. And what's cool is that this makes for a variety of different kinds of armies underneath kind of the big Skaven in capital S umbrella, right? Pestilence armies are going to fight vastly different from, say, Skryre armies, where they have high and technological weapons and things like that from ranged attacks, whereas Pestilence, the biological stuff has to be pretty close to get people infected. Those fight differently, but Skaven as a whole are very similar in their temperament, so there's kind of this reoccurring theme in all of them that unites them, but the differences make them very, very interesting, both aesthetically and gameplay-wise. Now, what's interesting about Skaven is that no matter what kind of clan you fit into, they all almost universally use slaves. Reason is simple, and that's because lives for the Skaven are very cheap and plentiful. They can produce more Skaven easier than any other thing, and so they use slave labor to get every single thing done. In fact, in the old world, it was their most abundant and powerful resource, because these guys are a horde army. It doesn't really matter what clan you fall into, slave labor makes up the vast bulk of any clan, simply because Skryre needs test subjects for their experiments and technologies and stuff like that. Mulder needs body parts. They tear apart slaves and put them back together in a Frankenstein fashion. Eshin are very small and elites. They need bodies to kind of distract the enemy so that the assassin can go in and kill people. Again, all these clans, use slaves in various means. Now, of course, you can, in the game, build a Skryre army that's very elite. Of course you possibly can. But the thing is that thematically, that makes up a very small percentage-wise of an entire army. So that's kind of the clans and with the theme and feel of them for new people. In the End Times, Skaven were big players. There's a book called End Times Thankful, which is basically a Skaven player snorted a bunch of cocaine and wrote an End Times book, because Skaven win everything, and every one of these clans has their day in the sun. Okay, I'm going to rapid fire all the things that the Skaven did in this book, and I want you to see if this sounds very overwhelming. Clan Skryre built a giant rocket and blew up the moon. The results of that moon being blown apart were colossal meteors that destroyed continents on the planet. Clan Pestilence launched a massive biological warfare attack on what we now know as Seraphon, back then Lizardmen, and absolutely exterminated them except for the very few number of Slann who got into spaceships and headed out to space. Clan Molder actually made a bunch of Skaven breeders and went down underneath the kind of subterranean levels and fought the dwarves, who are now the Dwarden, and they made it so that there are so many Skaven being bred that no matter how many dwarves kill them, there's 10 more to take their place. So it's an extinction level event by the sheer number of bodies that they were able to make by kind of manipulating the bodies of these mother hosts. And lastly, Eshin was also there by killing key heroes of any good guy faction throughout the story series. Last part is that the kind of nameless hordes, not really affiliated with a particular clan, under the leadership of Thanquol itself, decimated multiple human cities, the most important of which was the city of Nuln. Fun fact, that's where Nuln Oil, the wash, gets its name. Now, for all their mindless destruction and all the great gains that they did, destroying forces of what we now know as Order, the fact of the matter is, Archaon's plan at the end times was bigger than that. Right, it was world destroying, not just civilization destroying. So the Great Horned Rat and all the various clans beneath him saw the Archaon's plan was going to happen, and they wanted to be on the right side of the end. So they actually knelt before Archaon in that moment. So that's why in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Skaven were their own thing, and now in AOS they are part of Chaos. So now we're here in AOS, and the simple fact of the matter is there's not nearly as much lore for them as their fan base would suggest. A faction that's so iconic to this kind of whole IP universe, you'd think it would have more support. But right now we're going to put the elements that we have together and discuss why Skaven are awesome, they're relevant, and why they really, really need some attention. The first thing we're going to talk about is gnaw holes. People ask about this one all the time because it's sort of a vague thing. And to be fair, it's the most important aspect, I think, from an army perspective, about the Skaven. Now, in real life, rats can dig warrens. They can kind of build these little underground tunnel networks. They can also go through walls in your house and things like that, all these terribly gross things that rats do. In AOS, they can do the exact same thing, but instead of digging through a solid material, they can dig through the stuff of reality. The lore designers for AOS, and I'll put a link to this video down below, have come out and kind of explained what the realms are more like. And really what it is a bunch of basically discs, okay, just kind of hovering around space. And as Skaven dig, they dig from one to another. Functionally, this is basically a wormhole. It allows travel from one realm to another, or at different points around one realm, without the use of a realm gate, which traditionally has, up till this point in the lore, been the main way that people transport themselves. Now, it's easy to look at that and say, well, that's kind of an auto-win thing. I mean, the entire point of the Realm Gate Wars is that control over these transportation methods is so vital that everyone had to kill and die for them. Wouldn't someone who could just bypass those just auto-win? That's a fair point, except for the huge risks involved in using a gnaw hole. The first one being is that it's not instantaneous travel. Unlike, say, a wormhole where you open it and you walk in one side and you immediately pop out on wherever the other end of the hole is, this is more of actually digging a literal tunnel. It could take months and years to get to where you're going. That's a lot of resources. It's a lot of slaves to stay alive in rotation and be able to do that. It's a lot of money, everything like that. So it takes a lot to do these kinds of long, one realm to the other gnaw holes. Another big thing is that it's very unreliable. That is, you don't actually really have a great idea of where you're popping out. You might have an estimate. Some of these guys have these charts and things like that. They know in their mind where they're going, but then when they pop out on the other end, it's completely different. They get super lost inside the gnaw holes. One thing any Skaven player can tell you is that they're not known for their accuracy. And even just being more practical, there are stories of gnaw holes collapsing. That was in the Pestilence book, I believe, the Battle Tome, where gnaw holes would collapse and entire congregations of filth would just be lost. In short, gnaw holes and the use of them is described very much the same as we would describe actual tunneling here in the real world. There are a lot of dangers to it, a lot of imprecise calculations on the Skaven's parts that make that even worse, and so it's not the auto-win button that you would think it would be lore-wise. In the description down below, I will have a link to a malign-important short story that they put out called The Great Gnaw, in which depicts a Skaven gnaw hole drill team going through, and the guy's super pumped about where he's going, and then when it gets to their end, a huge wave of water gushes out, and all of them die and drown because he opened it at the bottom of an ocean. Again, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. That's not an auto-win scenario. Now, the next Skaven-esque thing we're waiting to see brought into AOS is Warpstone. If you're not familiar, in the old world, Skaven loved this material called warpstone. Basically, it's solidified magic, and they would like gnaw on it and snort it and do all kinds of stuff. Basically, it would create visions and increase their magic capabilities and things like that temporarily, give them a false sense of superiority, much like, I guess cocaine is probably the closest thing, but also magic powers are imbued as well. Now, realistically, no one's actually mentioned warpstone in Age of Sigmar. As far as I can tell, it hasn't been mentioned a lot. Maybe a shout out here or there. What we have seen, however, though, is, I believe it's called Realmstone. And my prediction is that they're basically going to do a one-to-one replacement. They function the exact same. It's solidified magic that imbues power to the person consuming it. And the last big thing is the clans. GW decided to split up the Skaven army range into the various clans that they represent. And not all of them are really well represented, but I'll rapid fire through them and we'll see the ones that exist now. The biggest one being Pestilence. Pestilence is actually fairly well represented. It was one of the earliest battle tomes to come out for AOS, and this features the kind of biological warfare side of Great Horned Rat's plans to conquer everything. They have a battle tome and a star collecting box and rules in the General's Handbook 2017. I have a link, and I'll put it down below, to the star collecting box and also a review of the new General's Handbook rules and how they all kind of fit together. It's a faction that I deeply, deeply love, and I one day want to do a Pestilence army. And I didn't realize this until I started researching it more, but there's actually a total of 5 books for them. There's the Battle Tome, and then there's actually 4 short stories for them over on the Black Library website. And like I said before, these guys really focus on conquering the realms through the use of biological warfare. Plagues, disease, pestilence, things like that. All these things that are meant to choke and kill their opponent, really without doing a whole lot of physical labor and fighting. But more as like what we would call in the game mortal wounds, right? The result of powerful abilities going at them. Next up is Clan Scryer. And these guys focus on weapons and technology to conquer the realms rather than brute force with slaves or using anything else. And these are the guys who built the giant rocket and blew up the moon in the old world. And their model range is probably one of the better supported next to Pestilence, where they have the Storm Fiends, the big giant rat ogres with Gatling cannons and stuff for their arms. They also have the Warp Lightning Cannon, Jezzails, a lot of long-range technology to do the job from afar. Thematically, they go through huge amounts of slaves because every gun gets tested on a slave. Every type of weird lightning technology, they put the slave in there to build it because it's going to go off wrong and detonate and blow up. So all those kinds of things, like they have a very low view of Skaven life. And they're led by the Arch Warlocks, these Skaven that are decked out with all kinds of weapons and technology and cool looking armor. Next up is my actual personal favorite Skaven clan, and that is Mulder. These guys are the epitome of Frankenstein in the mortal realms. Basically, they use genetic modification, breeding, and they stitch together different animals and make living weapons of war to fight their battles. This is some serious horror movie stuff, right? Like, think like Human Centipede thing. Their crowning achievement is the Hell Pit Abomination. And nothing fights up close and personal like a rat ogre, like those big hulking mega Skaven that you might see. They came in the Island of Blood starter box, as well as the Dawn Spire or whatever it was, the new one where they released the same models but with round bases. Now it's important to note that they do different kinds of modification. They do the Frankenstein stitching things together, like the Hell Pit Abomination that stitches all up its body and things like that. But they also do breeding, and that's very important because other clans will contract them to breed them a specific type of warrior. For example, in Scryer, they have these giant rat ogres with the big guns, but they found that they couldn't get the brains to be smart enough, right, through breeding, to kind of wield them right. And so what they did was they contacted Mulder and said, we need brain bugs, all right, I need brain Skaven. And so if you look on the back of the Storm Fiend's body, you'll see a crippled little shriveled up rat with a huge brain. That's because they were specifically bred to kind of work together in tandem with the rat ogres wielding all the weapons. That's an example of how they can manipulate bodies and things like that to get the perfect weapon of war. In addition to that, they also use just traditional beasts in their battles. So they have actual swarms of rats that are led by a packmaster, and he whips them and then go in the right place and they just chew and eat up people. Point is, it's really any kind of living weapon, and that kind of lends itself to up close and personal combat. And the last clan that's kind of represented really, as far as the unique ones go, is Eshin. These are the guys who are all about stealth and assassinations. And between gnaw holes and their own stealth abilities, they can really get anywhere and get almost to anyone. And as such, they don't really have armies. I mean, they have gutter runners and night runners, which are kind of just like smaller units, multiple dudes, but they don't have a tried and true like standing army, because the real focus of them is the assassin, which is obviously an individual. And so, kind of stepping back from what the clans are and what they're doing right now, I want to talk about why we need Skaven. Here's the thing. There's something to an enemy that can be anywhere, right? Archaon is one person, and he can be at one place at a time. Now, granted, he can travel pretty darn quickly on the back of Dorgar, but he is one person. But when you talk about a Nahol that can pop up anywhere, that's a huge deal. That's a huge strategic thing. No matter what the risks are, they will get there. The realm gates exist as a narrative device for any army to be able to fight any other army, regardless of geographical location. And so Nahols take that up to another degree. Now, the next reason that Skaven are so important to this game is that Horde armies add character. There's this paradox where the bigger your army gets, sort of the less kind of character each individual model has, until you hit this critical mass where you have so many faceless dudes that your heroes really stand out. Right? The more faceless guys you have, the more your heroes become incredibly important. You invest in them. And character is the defining feature of Skaven. It's what they're best at. In addition to that, Horde armies add a lot of dimension to this game, as a game, right? You don't always see Horde armies. Not a lot of Skaven players are out there driving huge hordes of dudes, relatively speaking, but you have to plan for them, because if you're not ready for it and you run up against one, they're going to crush you. And I love the fact that you're always playing a very thematic game when you play as Skaven. By this I mean, you're going to bring a lot of dudes, which is very lore-based, it's like lore-focused. A lot of them are going to run away, which is exactly what Skaven do in every book that they're in. Your heroes are going to lead from the back, and this is the biggest one, I think. In these books you see like, and there was Volstis Bladestorm up in the front fighting Korgus Kull, and in the actual game, he gets sniped turn one, right? It doesn't happen. You keep your leaders in the back. But with Skaven, that's exactly how they fight. They drum up all this arrogance and ego, and then they always lead from the back. And then at the very end of the battle, they go up and kill the enemy leader for glory and style points. That is literally how we actually play Age of Sigmar the game, except that's actually how it's written for Skaven, but really no one else. Did you make a bad tactical decision? That's okay, Skaven do too. You're just playing to the lore. Did 30 rats just run away? Yeah, that's gonna happen. It happens in every single book. My point is that nobody brings the story to the tabletop like Skaven do. And so I want to end this video talking about the kind of things that I would love to see in a Skaven book coming out. Keep in mind, I have no insider knowledge. I don't even know if Skaven's on the docket for the next 2 years. I don't know anything. This is just kind of my dreaming. I think currently the range is a bit too divided. I think lore-wise, all these factions take from slaves, but that doesn't really work on a tabletop the same way. You can ally in 400 points of clan rats, sure, but I think a little more freedom in list building is kind of what's needed. Because so many of these clans have only 4 to 5 options, that even if you could take 400 points of clan rats, it's not enough. What I'd love to see is them kind of bring the clans back together a little bit. You can keep Pestilence separate, like they did with Flesh Eater Courts and Death, because they do have some very different ideologies to the rest of Skaven kind, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Bring the rest of them back together, give clan rats a keyword where you can kind of do whatever you want, have it be clan, right? So you can assign them to be Pestilence or Scryer or Mold or whatever. You can have them work wherever you want. This way, you don't have to worry about allies and things like that. You can just build a Skaven list with Scryer rules and have clan rats act as your slaves in there. I'd even love it if there was a section where if you pick your clan as sort of your allegiance or whatever, it doesn't work with any other clans because you're all about one thing. That'd be kind of fun. I don't know. It would definitely encourage them to really flesh out each one of the clans and give them their own unique personality and rules and things like that, and I think that would be a win. But fundamentally, I think they all need to pull from the same pot. Kind of like how all the different Chaos Gods can pull Chaos Warriors, because they can take whatever god, they can set up a unit and give it a keyword, just like I wish they would do for clan rats and various clans. But friends, those are just my thoughts on Skaven and how they function in AOS. I want to hear your thoughts. Every video is the start of a discussion. I want to hear what you would like to see in a battle tome related to either one of these clans, if they keep them separate, or if they were to bring them back together under one umbrella. Don't forget to click subscribe, leave a question in the comments below that you would like answered, and go ahead over to Instagram and check out and see what I'm working on. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in my next AOS lore video. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want to introduce you to some awesome folks. These are my patrons over on Patreon, and they make this show possible by their direct support of me to buy battle tomes and Black Library books and all the material I need and the hardware support that I need to make this stuff possible. And if you'd like to join them, go ahead and click over to the Patreon page, to the link in the description down below, and you'll be introduced to a really awesome community of people talking about the hobby, sharing what they're painting. I invite them to be a part of polls to decide what content comes next. I raffle off every battle tome that I review, and we're having some great fun and discussions over there. So go ahead and check it out. Now, if you can't support in that way, that's completely fine. I'm just so glad that you watched this video here today. And if you have an Age of Sigmar lore question, go ahead and click subscribe and leave it in the comments down below. I read every single question and comment. I respond to as many as I possibly can, but I use them all as inspiration for future videos. So go ahead and do that now. And I look forward to seeing you guys on my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.